Shabbat Shalom. In this week's Parsha, Tisa, we have the sin of the golden calf, which is a hugely disappointing and tragic moment in the history of the Jewish people. Just 40 days after receiving the 10 Commandments and the Torah from God at Har Sinai, just 40 days after pledging trust and commitment, the Jews become filled with doubt and do something that they agreed not to do just a few weeks earlier, and build and serve an idol. How could things go so wrong? I'd like to think about and explore what was going on in the mindset of the Jews at the time, to think about, whether we would have acted differently in that situation, or even if we still fall into similar traps. Just looking at the pshat, looking at the words that the Torah gives us, we're given very little information about what led up to this huge, momentous and tumultuous event. But it might be just enough to understand. The verse says, and this verse comes right after we hear that Hashem concluded telling Moshe all about the commandments, gave him the tablets. This is the next verse that we hear. Vaya'ar ha'am ki boshesh Moshe. The people saw that Moshe was late, was delayed, laredet min hahar, from coming down the mountain. Vayikahel ha'am al Aharon, and the people gathered against Aharon. Vayomru elav, and they said to him, Kum, get up, come. Aseh lanu Elohim, make for us God. Asher yalchu lefanenu, who will go before us. Ki zeh Moshe ha'ish, for this man, Moshe, Asher ha'elanu me'eretz Mitzrayim, who brought us up from the land of Egypt, lo yadanu mehayalo. We don't know what has happened to him. And that is all we hear. The next thing we see is Aaron asking them for their jewelry, them throwing it into a fire and out coming a calf, which they then claim is a god that took them out of Egypt. So even though it's a little bit of information, we actually have two very important pieces of information. One is what provoked this behavior, this action. And that was that Moshe came down late. Doesn't seem a good reason, but that's what we have. We have a motivation, the thing that led to it, the trigger. And the other thing we hear is really the underlying issue, the underlying anxiety, the underlying cause, which is very powerful. It's lo yadanu mehayalo. We don't know what has happened to him. Now, without the help of some of the commentators, this would seem very confusing, but Rashi does provide an interesting understanding which helps make a lot of sense. So he first explains what the delay, why the delay caused so much anxiety, and that was because Moshe had told them that he was coming down in a certain amount of time, and there was a miscalculation, and that the Jews thought he was supposed to be back by now, and he wasn't. So firstly, that there was a bit of concern that he hadn't come down when he said he would. We know that he was due to come down the next day, and he did come down the next day. And after Rashi explains the whole calculation, we hear something very interesting. He says that the Satan got involved. The Satan, evil meddler, he says that on the 16th day, the Satan, Basatan ve'irbev et haolam, and he caused confusion in the world. And he made it appear like darkness, and gloom and disorder. Lomar, vaday met Moshe. When the Jews experienced this great confusion and doom and darkness and gloominess, they said, for sure Moshe must have died. Lekach ba irbuvia. That's why the confusion has come. Laolam, to the world. Amar lahem met Moshe, and the Satan confirmed to them, he said back to them, yes, Moshe is dead. And there's even some midrashim that say that he sort of showed them an image of Moshe's body suspended up on top of the mountain. So they actually felt like they saw Moshe had actually died. Now this completely changes the situation from being a bit worried that they were late to sort of having this fear and almost certainty that Moshe was gone. And they were here in the desert, left without anything around them, and there was a deep fear of uncertainty. And that is at the root of what is going on for them. This lo yadanu mehayalo, we don't know what has happened to him. This uncertainty, we don't know what's going to happen to us, so we don't know where we're meant to go, what we're meant to do. And this is what led to their irrational, foolish, and hasty actions that caused real irreparable damage with their relationship with God, where these first tablets, that the first luchot Hashem gave the Jews, were broken, and they were given a different pair, a new pair, not the same pair fixed, a different pair. And when I think of this, I think particularly in the time that we're living at the moment, how much uncertainty many of us might feel. And you might think of, as I talk about this, very specific incidents, maybe when you were a child, that complete panic when you think that you're lost and you can't see your parents around you, and then you realize that they're just the other way, that you didn't see them, you didn't notice them. Or as a parent, when for a few seconds you feel like you've lost your child and you can't find them. You might feel this panic or this unknown when your life plan doesn't go to how you thought it would be, and something happens, whether it's in your career or something very unexpected in your life, and you have to navigate a very unknown territory, an unknown field. And as I mentioned, of course, at this moment we're dealing with a whole bunch of unknowns in that we're either thinking about very starkly in our day-to-day, or it's there in the background, an unknown about what's going to happen in the world, when lockdown's going to end. There's lots of unknowns and uncertainties, and that deeply unsettles us. It's a hard place to be in. One of the theories in existential philosophy and psychology identifies that the world is a very uncertain place, because we don't know what's going to happen, and we can't control what's going to happen. Rather, we live with an illusion of control, that we like to feel we know what's going to happen. And most of the time, we're very good at ignoring the fact that we're completely out of control, and very few things are in our control. And when we're faced with a moment that happens, we experience a deep discomfort and possibly a crisis, an existential crisis. And so it is unsettling. And we also know from a lot of psychology research that our brains are hardwired to like predictability. We're constantly trying to figure out patterns and predict things. That's what our brains like to do. And when things are uncertain, or there's ambiguity, our brain sort of treats it like pain, or experiences it as a threat, and puts us into a mode where we feel threatened, and we might start acting in a fight or flight mode, and start thinking irrationally more about survival than anything else. And we don't really have those regulating behaviors going on. We can lose our sense of rationality. We can end up acting in ways, making choices, saying things that are not thought through or controlled. And when that happens, what we all do, we see what happens with the Jews in the desert. We have a deep yearning to try and regain a sense of control. So what are the Jews trying to do straight away? Make a new leader, have something new, something that is familiar, that can continue in the way that they know what to do, something to follow. They're familiar with serving someone else or following orders, and they seek to create that. But they're seeking to create a false security. And of course they do it in a foolish way, because all they had to do was take a step back and say, hey, just not long ago we promised not to build an idol and serve it, a molten image and serve it. The other very interesting thing that happens when we do go into a mode of panic or fear is that we change information to fit our narrative. We don't think in a rational, objective way. And we sort of seek to find things that confirm how we're thinking in our deepest fears. We see this also with the Jews in a very interesting way, where once the calf is created, nobody says, oh, this is not something we're supposed to be doing, but rather they say, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And this is so surprising because they all actually came out of Egypt and knew that this calf had nothing to do with it. It never existed at that point. But when you're in that state of panic, things that seem completely irrational, that are completely irrational, seem like they make total sense, and our thinking is adjusted, and we don't really think clearly in those times. There is no doubt that the effects of panic can be so damaging and make you ruin your relationships and make bad decisions. So what can we do about it when we're in those moments? Because it happens to everyone. And even if it's not a crisis, we do at times have this deep, maybe it's even sometimes a feeling of hopelessness when we're faced with such lack of control or uncertainty. And recent research identifies that the fear of the unknown might be one of the things that actually underlies all types of anxieties and phobias. It's this fear of unknown that is very fundamental to us as humans. So when this happens, there are a few things that we can do to help ourselves in the moment and make sure that we maintain our, 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 our rational thinking and able to make good choices. The very first thing is deeper breathing. Deep breathing is very important because when your body is feeling threatened, when you are feeling threatened, you're going through this fight or flight response, what you do by deep breathing is you're telling your brain and your body there's no need to feel threatened. You force it to feel relaxed. And so deep breathing is absolutely crucial to help you regain that sense of control. It's a bit like when you were a child and people told you to count to 10 whenever you felt angry. It's the same thing. It's about slowing down the panic response, the immediate threat and survival response. It's about the other thing that really helps when you're in this unknown place and you don't know where to turn and what to do and you're in an absolute panic, is think, well, what do I know, as opposed to what do I not know, and am I just guessing and am I just thinking about the worst case scenarios? What are the things that I do know and what can I do about it right now? And that feeling, that does give you actually a sense of control of your situation by thinking about what you can do in this very moment. Something that's quite hard to do, but can also be very helpful, is accept the anxiety. Accept that there are so many unknowns in life, and it's not an experience I can escape. And trying to live with it is the only way forward, as opposed to trying to live avoiding it. And there's a wonderful book which I highly recommend called The Happiness Trap, which is based on something called acceptance and commitment therapy, which really guides you into learning how to just allow your emotions to be present without allowing them to dictate over how you should react, and how you allow them to, you give them more power than they have. That emotions and thoughts are things that pass through us constantly, and the only effect they have is the one that we allow them to have. Other things that can help is thinking to the past. When did you last experience something similar, and how did you get through it? And recognizing your achievements. You clearly did get through it because you're here, and you've handled things like that in the past, and you can handle it now. Finally, of course, looking after yourself and doing things that make you feel good are important, so that there's different sorts of emotions. You're not just consumed and focusing entirely on the panic, on the worry, but actually you're having a mixture of emotions and feelings in your life. And the other thing that's really helpful, also from this idea of acceptance commitment therapy, is putting limitations on your worry and your panic. So instead of, for example, thinking I'm stressed, I'm really stressed, I'm really worried, it's putting a boundary and limitation on what you're feeling, saying, right now I'm feeling stressed and worried, which all of a sudden takes it from this very big global feeling into a much more specific feeling. This story of the golden calf is definitely one of the most tumultuous in our Torah. followed, well, alongside also the one about the spies, where we know that the Jews then are doomed to pretty much die in the desert, and those who wanted to seek out the land never get to actually experience the land of Israel, which also comes from a fear of unknown, of what were they about to go into, unknown land. And this really seems to be a trap for us, both as Jews in our narrative in the story, and but in our everyday lives. These things happen to people, maybe on a small scale, maybe on a big scale, constantly in our day-to-day lives. Something I see both with therapists and just in my personal life, both in myself and in people around me. And maybe that's why these are such momentous parts of the Torah, that so that we're really drawn to thinking about them and learning about them and thinking about the traps that we can have that happen as a result of wanting to know and wanting to feel in control, and thinking about how we can just relinquish that need for control, accept that things are uncertain, and still make good decisions as a result of it. Wishing you a very Shabbat Shalom.